Tonight, you'll hear 3 disturbing childhood memory horror stories. True or not, I'll let you decide. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because some stories stay with you forever. Childhood is supposed to be the safest time of our lives. But some memories don't fade, and some nightmares don't stay in our dreams. Tonight, you'll hear 3 disturbing childhood memory horror stories. Real accounts that still haunt the people who live them. From the neighbor who watched a child every night through his window, to the doll that refused to stay in the attic, and the man hiding where no one should ever be, under a child's bed. These stories aren't just scary. They're unforgettable. So dim the lights, put on your headphones, and before we begin, don't forget to subscribe. Because once you hear these childhood horrors, you'll never sleep the same again. Story 1. I grew up in a quiet Ohio suburb in the late 90s. Back then, life felt simple. Kids rode bikes until the streetlights buzzed on, parents sat on porches sipping iced tea, and everyone waved when they passed you on the street. But on our block, there was one house no one talked about. It sat at the far corner, half hidden behind wild hedges that hadn't been trimmed in years. The shutters hung by rusted nails, the siding peeled like rotting skin, and the chain-link fence sagged inward as if the house itself were collapsing. At night, a dim yellow glow bled through an upstairs window, like the house itself was keeping watch. Everyone said an old man lived there, but no one had ever actually seen him. He never mowed the lawn. Never picked up mail. Never opened the door when kids knocked as a dare. That silence made him scarier than if he'd been a loud, angry neighbor. I was 8 years old the first time I saw him. It was late, nearly midnight. My parents were asleep, and I couldn't. I crept to my bedroom window, pressing my face to the glass to watch the still street. That's when I noticed something. The yellow-lit window across the street. Someone was standing there. A figure, tall, gaunt, shoulders hunched. He wasn't moving, wasn't shifting, wasn't even swaying. Just perfectly still, framed in the glow like a shadow cut out of the night. At first, I thought he was looking at the street. But then I realized. He was staring at me. I froze, my small hands pressed to the glass, my throat tightening. His head was angled just enough that I could see the dark hollows where eyes should be. They weren't blinking. They weren't turning away. They were locked on mine as if he'd been waiting for me to notice him. Then, he raised a hand. Slowly. Smoothly. As if the motion had been rehearsed. And he waved. Not a friendly wave. Not a casual hello. It was stiff, deliberate, wrong. The kind of wave that said, "I see you. I always see you." I stumbled backward, crashing against my nightstand, knocking over a lamp. The noise was loud in the silence of my room, but when I glanced back, he hadn't flinched. He was still there. Still staring. Still waving. I yanked my curtains shut and crawled under my covers, trembling so hard my teeth clattered. For hours, I lay there, every creak of the house making me jolt, every shadow stretching across my room making me feel like he was closer. And that was the first night I saw him. But it wasn't the last. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream. That maybe my tired brain had conjured up the figure at the window. But when I pulled my curtains aside, the yellow glow was still there. The house looked exactly the same, silent, sagging, swallowed by weeds. Except now, it didn't feel abandoned. That night, I did everything I could to avoid looking outside. I played with my toys until my mom told me to sleep. I left the hallway light on. I even buried myself under blankets until sweat dripped down my face. But curiosity always wins. Around midnight, I peeked again. He was there. The same shadowy figure. The same window. And again, he was staring right at me. This time, I refused to move. I wanted to prove I wasn't scared. So I stared back, eyes watering, throat dry. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, his head tilted. Not much. Just enough to let me know he was alive. That he was real. I gasped, stumbling back from the window, but I couldn't scream. It felt like my voice had been stolen. And then, he smiled. Not a wide smile. Not a friendly grin. Just a small curve of the lips, stretched in a way that felt inhuman. I ripped the curtain shut. My chest heaved as I crawled into bed, whispering to myself. It's just my imagination. It's just my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The following nights were worse. No matter when I looked, he was there. Midnight. 2 a.m. 3 in the morning. Always in the same spot. Always staring. Sometimes tilting his head. Sometimes raising that horrible wave. It became a ritual I couldn't escape. I'd shut my curtains, but the glow still seeped through, reminding me he was watching. And if I ignored him, if I forced myself to stay in bed, I'd hear things. Coming from my own window. For days, I pretended everything was normal. I went to school, rode my bike with friends, ate dinner with my family. But every night when the world went quiet, the same dread filled me. I knew he would be there. And he was. Always standing in that same yellow-lit window. Always staring. At first, I thought maybe he was stuck, like maybe he couldn't leave the window. That thought kept me sane. Until the tapping started. The first time, I thought it was branches. But when I pulled my curtains back, he was gone. The yellow window was empty. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the glass, scanning the street. Nothing. Just shadows stretching across the road, trees swaying in the breeze. And then, I jumped back, nearly falling. The sound hadn't come from across the street. It had come from my window. My breath caught in my throat as I inched closer. There, smeared faintly against the glass, was the outline of a handprint. Not mine. Larger. Longer. I tore the curtain shut so fast the rod nearly came off the wall. I scrambled into bed, curling into a ball, whispering for my parents. But my voice was no louder than a whimper. The tapping came back. Louder now. Faster. Tap. 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 I pressed my hands over my ears, tears streaming down my face. It went on for what felt like forever, until finally, it stopped. And when I found the courage to peek again, the handprint was gone. But the yellow light was still on. And I knew he'd just gone back home. I thought the handprint was the worst it could get. But I was wrong. 2 nights later, I woke up to silence. No tapping. No creaks. Just silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe he was gone. Then I noticed something. The yellow glow across the street was gone. I leaned closer to my window, pressing my face against the glass. The house was dark. Dead. Empty. For the first time, I couldn't see him. And then... tap. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. It wasn't coming from across the street. It was coming from inside my room. The curtains I had shut tight were parted. Just slightly. Enough for a sliver of moonlight to fall through. And in that gap, I saw movement. A pale hand, sliding between the curtains. I stumbled backward, tripping over toys on the floor, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The hand curled around the edge of the curtain, pulling it open inch by inch. And there he was. Not across the street. Not in the window. In my room. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared. That same horrible smile stretching wider now, like he'd finally gotten what he wanted. My scream finally broke free. I bolted out of my room, racing down the hall, slamming into my parents' bedroom. By the time they stormed into my room with the lights on, he was gone. The curtains were drawn shut. The window was locked. No handprints. No figure. Nothing. Just the faint glow across the street. They told me it was a nightmare. that I'd imagined it. But deep down, I know what I saw. And even now, decades later, when I drive past that old neighborhood, that window still glows. And sometimes, I swear I still see him there, watching. If you thought that was disturbing, you're not ready for what comes next. Our second story isn't about a strange man outside your window, but something much closer. Something you can't lock out. A forgotten doll, found in an attic, that refused to stay put. And what it did when the lights went out. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe, because the deeper we go, the darker the memories get. This is The Doll in the Attic. When I was 9, my family moved into a 2-story house in Pennsylvania. It was old, built sometime in the 1940s, with creaky floors and wallpaper that peeled in the corners. My mom said it had character, but to me, it felt heavy, like the house itself was keeping secrets. On the first day we moved in, my dad asked me to help him put some boxes in the attic. I remember climbing the narrow wooden stairs, the smell of dust and old wood hitting me like a wall. The attic was dim, lit only by a single dangling bulb that buzzed faintly when it flickered on. There were old trunks, stacks of newspapers, and boxes left behind by whoever had lived there before. One box sat apart from the rest, shoved against the far wall. Unlike the others, it wasn't labeled. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied shut with twine, almost like someone hadn't wanted it to be opened. Of course, being a kid, that made me want to open it even more. I untied the string, pulled away the paper, and lifted the lid. Inside was a single porcelain doll. Her face was pale, her eyes painted an icy blue, and her smile was just a little too wide. She wore a faded red dress and had a crack running down her left cheek, like she'd been dropped but survived. At first, I thought she was just an old toy. But as I stared at her, something strange happened. The attic felt colder. And though the doll's glassy eyes should have been fixed forward, it felt like she was looking directly at me. I slammed the lid shut, shoved the box back into the corner, and told myself it was just my imagination. But that night, when I went to bed, the doll wasn't in the attic anymore. She was sitting on my dresser. I screamed when I saw the doll sitting on my dresser. My mom rushed into my room, hair a mess, eyes half asleep. I pointed at it, my words tumbling out too fast to make sense. But when she looked, she just sighed. "Oh, honey," she said. "You probably just brought it down from the attic without realizing. You were playing with it and forgot." I shook my head hard. I hadn't touched that doll since I shut the box. But she didn't believe me. Parents never do. That night, I shoved the doll into my closet, under a pile of clothes, and shut the door tight. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. The closet door was open. And the doll was sitting in the middle of my floor, facing my bed. I told myself I was dreaming. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But then I heard it. The sound of porcelain tapping against wood. Tap. 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 Like someone setting down delicate little feet, one step at a time. I lowered the blanket just enough to peek. The doll had moved closer. She was halfway across the room now. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The doll's painted lips seemed wider than before, stretched into a crooked smile that hadn't been there earlier. And her glassy blue eyes. They were pointed directly at me. The next morning, I told my dad what had happened. He just laughed. "It's an old toy," he said. "Your imagination's running wild. Stop scaring yourself." But I knew the truth. Dolls don't move on their own. That night, I tried to stay awake. I wanted to catch it in the act. I set the doll back in the closet, shut the door, and sat on my bed with a flashlight clutched in my hands. Hours passed. My eyelids grew heavy. The house was silent. Until my flashlight slipped from my fingers as I snapped upright. The closet door was open again. And the doll wasn't inside. I swung the flashlight across the room. The beam landed on her, she was standing on my desk. Her painted face turned toward me. Her cracked cheeks seemed deeper now, as if the smile had widened through the fracture. I backed up against the wall, too scared to breathe. And then I heard it. Click, click, click. Footsteps. Not heavy ones like my parents'. Not soft like mine. But sharp. Hollow. Like porcelain tapping against the wooden floorboards. The doll stepped down from the desk. Slowly. Deliberately. Each movement stiff, unnatural, but unstoppable. Click, click, click. It was walking toward me. I fumbled with my flashlight, shining it directly into her face. For a second, I thought it would stop her. But she didn't even blink. Her blue eyes reflected the light, glowing like shards of ice. And then, in the beam, her lips curled into something I will never forget. A grin. Wide. Cracked. Wrong. I screamed so loud my parents came running. By the time they burst into the room, the doll was back in the closet. Sitting perfectly still. Exactly where I had put her. After that night, my parents locked the doll back in the attic. My dad even nailed the box shut. He told me I'd grow out of it, that it was just bad dreams. But I knew better. And the house knew too. Because that night was the last time I ever slept in that bedroom. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound that still makes my skin crawl. The attic door creaking open. I pulled the blankets over my head, praying it was just my dad. But then I heard it. Click, click, click. Those sharp, hollow footsteps on the stairs. Coming closer. My door handle rattled. Turned. And then, opened. The doll stepped inside. Her cracked face gleamed in the moonlight. Her glassy blue eyes locked onto me. And this time, she wasn't stopping. She walked across the room. One step at a time. Her tiny porcelain feet clicking against the wood. Click. 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 Until she was standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't scream. She tilted her head, that wide, jagged smile stretching even more. And then, she climbed onto my bed. Her cold porcelain hand touched my ankle. That was when I finally screamed. My parents came running, bursting into the room, flipping on the light. And the doll was gone. The only trace she'd ever been there was the attic door, wide open. We moved out of that house a month later. My parents said it was because the commute was too long, but I knew the truth. Because even now, decades later, I can still hear those footsteps sometimes when I close my eyes. Click. 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 You've seen the neighbor at the window. You've heard the doll that refused to stay in the attic. But our final story tonight? It's the most disturbing of them all. Because this one isn't about ghosts or haunted objects. It's about something real. Something human. Two children thought they were safe at a sleepover until they realized they weren't alone. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because the final memory will crawl into your head and stay there. This is The Man Under the Bed. Story 3. When I was 10, I had a best friend named Jake. We lived just a few houses apart, and one weekend he invited me to a sleepover. His parents were going out for the evening, but they said they'd be back before midnight. We played video games, ate pizza, and laughed so hard our stomachs hurt. By the time it got late, we set up our sleeping bags on the floor of his room. His parents hadn't come back yet, but we weren't worried. We were just kids. That's when we heard it. A sound. From under the bed. At first, Jake thought it was the dog. But they didn't have a dog. We pressed our ears to the carpet. There was again, soft, steady breathing. We looked at each other, pale, unsure if we should scream or run. Then a voice whispered. Low. Raspy. Wrong. Don't tell your parents. We bolted, racing for the front door, but it wouldn't open. It was locked with the chain high up where we couldn't reach. And upstairs, the sound of movement. Something crawling out from under Jake's bed. We stood frozen in the dark living room, hearts pounding so loud it felt like the whole house could hear. The sound upstairs grew heavier, deliberate, like someone dragging themselves across the floor. Jake whispered, "It's just the house settling." But his voice shook, and we both knew that wasn't true. We needed to call someone. A neighbor. The police. Anybody. Jake reached for the phone on the kitchen wall. His hand trembled as he dialed. But before he could finish, the line went dead. We backed away from the kitchen, eyes fixed on the stairs. That's when we saw it. A shadow moved across the top landing. Slow. Crawling. But this wasn't the shadow of a child. It was longer. Thinner. Wrong. We ducked behind the couch, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. My chest ached from holding my breath. The house was silent again, so silent it made the ticking of the wall clock unbearable. Then, step. 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 The man was coming down. We could see him now. Bare feet, filthy and cracked. Long toenails scratching the wood with each step. His legs were thin, almost skeletal, covered in dirt. And then his voice again. "Where are you, boys?" We stayed crouched behind the couch, my hand gripping Jake's so tight I thought I'd break his fingers. The man's footsteps creaked closer, each one stretching time like an eternity. He reached the bottom of the stairs. We could see him now, just his lower half. His legs were wiry, his clothes ripped and stained. He wasn't moving like a normal person. His gait was crooked, like his joints bent the wrong way. Jake's breath hitched, too loud. The man froze. He tilted his head, sniffing the air like an animal. Then, slowly, he dropped to his hands and knees. And started crawling. Not toward the kitchen. Not toward the door. Toward us. His fingers curled around the edge of the couch. His nails were long, jagged, yellow. We could hear his breathing, wet, raspy, hungry. I wanted to scream, but Jake pressed his hand over my mouth. My body shook so hard it felt like my bones rattled. Then the man spoke. "I can smell you." His head started to rise over the back of the couch. Strands of greasy hair slid into view, then the glint of a wide, cracked smile. We couldn't wait anymore. Jake grabbed my arm, and together we bolted. Straight for the back door. We sprinted for the back door, our bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. My heart hammered so loud it drowned everything else out, until I heard his laughter. Not normal laughter. High-pitched. Broken. Like glass shattering. Jake fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking. The chain was too high, we couldn't reach it. I grabbed a chair, dragged it over, and climbed up. My fingers clawed at the metal latch. Behind us. Click. 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 Those sharp nails on the floor again. He was crawling after us. "Don't leave me," he hissed. His voice cracked into a scream. "Don't leave me." I yanked the chain free, shoved the door open, and we tumbled into the night. The cold air hit my face like salvation. We ran barefoot across the yard, straight to the neighbor's house, banging on the door until the lights came on. When the police arrived, Jake's parents finally pulled into the driveway. They thought we were making it up, until the officers went inside. The man was gone. But under Jake's bed, they found what he'd left behind. A blanket. Empty food wrappers. A rusty kitchen knife. He had been living there. For who knows how long. It's been decades since that night, but I'll never forget the sound of him crawling across the floor. Or the way his smile looked when he whispered, "I can smell you." You've just heard 3 disturbing childhood memory horror stories. But the question is, will you sleep tonight? Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't just memories. They're waiting. Watching. Ready to return when the lights go out. If these stories kept you awake, make sure you subscribe right now, and click the bell so you never miss the next nightmare. Because this channel is where the darkest memories live. And trust me, the next story might just be worse than all the ones you've heard tonight. Until then, sleep tight,